do you determine the best way to assess content return on investment? How do you make the case for content investments? And where do you start? Let's say you're just getting started with content or you have a reasonable footprint of content on your sites. What are the types of things you're using to justify said investment?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like I have a very opinionated stance on fractional revenue attribution, and I think it's pretty much garbage. I spent years building different methods of fractional revenue attribution. And at the end of the day, what I really learned is that as a data scientist, I can tell you whatever you want to hear. There is a way for me to surface the data and to present it in a way that's going to make whoever I want to look good look good. And ultimately it also is, I think, based on a bit of a flawed or oversimplification of the customer journey, where it's like this very kind of linear thing of, oh, people are going to digest like top of funnel content and then go to like middle of funnel and then bottom of funnel, and then they're going to convert on the website. When it's actually a lot more complicated than that. There's education that's happening outside of your web properties. And so ultimately, I think what's really critical is to go back to some of the fundamental assumptions that you're making on the go-to-market side. And I think the way you measure ROI and the way you think about ROI is going to be very different based on the context in which the content has been created. I think ABM essentially makes it really easy to talk about the ROI because I think ABM simplifies a lot of things. The ROI is pretty much like how many leads are we actually capturing? Are we driving awareness within these target accounts? And I think that's like an easy way to think about it, but I do think it applies to pretty much any kind of content that is acting as an acquisition magnet. And what you want to look at from an ROI perspective is how many high quality leads are you essentially generating from that content? And when I say generating, that's where we can go peel the onion. And of course, if you're doing like gated content, it's literally lead acquisition and just measuring how many records you get in the CRM. But you could also do like IP lookups.
How do you think that breaks down when you're thinking about people trying to be logicians of sorts by using fractional attribution?
I think, and what you mentioned, like leads are people, I think is the essence of the solution there. I think fractional attribution tends to think about the journey in a very mathematical sense, which I think is a major problem. The same way, when we're talking about how you can use AI in content, I think there are things that make sense. Like if you're doing data analysis to figure out what are the key topics or the keywords that we know index strongly with our audience, that is something that is a mathematical question. Now, trying to figure out what is an opinionated stance that is going to resonate strongly, that I believe in, and is going to resonate with my audience, that is something that is not a mathematical question because it relates to like empathy and to human emotions. And that's something that doesn't get solved with a mathematical equation. And the same way that the way like journeys and how, people interact with your web properties before becoming a customer has a big component of an emotional journey of going from interest to intrigue to maybe dazzlement and then payment and then like success and happiness and pride in what they've done and what they've accomplished with a tool. And it's really critical to bear that in mind. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, no mathematical model today is able to understand what that emotional journey is. And that's where I think content can be really powerful. And I think it's also where we see like some of the best content out there, or the content that works the best, is also content that will have a strong like emotional match with what the audience is looking for.
What do you think about for why people get ROI wrong on ABM focused content? And what are they doing wrong? Are they not thinking big enough? Are they doing fractional attribution as the core problem? Or is it just they're just not even thinking critically at all?
Generally, the term ROI ends up being very short-termist. It takes a lot of good writing, consistent writing before you actually start picking up and people start following you more. And then like whenever they're ready, they actually come to you. And so I think the challenge there is I think there's a lack of ability for content marketers to educate the rest of their leadership team to understand how to think about ROI in content. And I think that's where we're lacking, I think, both the benchmarks and even a template of how should you present the value of your content to at least leadership within marketing. But then like, again, that's why ABM to some extent, like managers say, here's like a list of 100 accounts I care about. If you're able to generate leads from those accounts, that's a success. It's still a vanity metric, but the interesting thing is because everyone agrees that these accounts are valuable, everyone is going to get excited about generating leads from these accounts. And where I think like at least our stance at MadKudu, like we think that's like why we create this fit idea, like which companies are a good fit. So it's basically saying out of the universe of companies out there, there's a subset of companies that are a good fit for your product. They could get value from your product, and those are the companies you should care about. And then it becomes that you can start measuring your content, at least on the acquisition side, by saying how many new accounts did we get penetration into that are a good fit thanks to our content. And we're basically starting the journey with them thanks to our content. And that is incredibly valuable. And then what you want to be able to show is how over the course of 6 months, you're showing, well, when we get some kind of like footprint within an account, then it takes us some time to get to a demo request or whatever, but we know there is a path to get there. And that is something that is really critical to show and to educate the team towards understanding that there's potentially no easy way to accelerate the journey from someone discovering who you are to actually becoming a customer.
How do you make the case when there may be mixed KPIs that the content is the thing that's contributing inside the journey in a way that makes it a required investment? I think that's really the great question. And the question that Amanda asked was generically, is ROI generating MQLs? Right. And so I think it's to say, how do we create a better narrative for our executives than just saying, here's a bunch of KPIs. They all are influenced by content.
Yep. That's an excellent question. And it's the way we like to think about it. And I think it's something that too often is ignored, right? So for the more bottom of funnel is like, how often is that piece of content used in a sales cycle proactively by a salesperson? Are we using this as sales enablement? That means that your content hits the mark. It also not only means that this is the other thing, right? It's not just about putting content out there. It's also about the part of sales enablement, which is talking to sales and making sure they understand why this piece of content exists, what it does, and who it's aimed at. So that's one thing that's like fairly easy of saying. It's much harder for your CEO to say, oh, we're going to stop doing content when you know that in every single deal, your sales reps are actually using pieces of content to prove their point. That's like a very close to the revenue without necessarily the like pure attribution thing. You're just saying, if I go tell my sales team, oh, by the way, we're removing all this content, we're no longer going to be writing anything new, and they're using this in every deal, they're like, please don't. And at least like you have that kind of emotional appeal to maintain that. And when we're looking at more top of funnel, I think the kind of qualified traffic, which again, measured either as qualified lead captures, which again, if you consider that qualified and unqualified kind of convert at similar rates, it gives you a sense, or using some kind of IP lookup tool to determine out of all the people visiting these different pages of content, what is the volume of quality traffic that we're getting? And potentially, what is the volume of net new quality accounts that are getting exposure thanks to this piece of content, because we're talking about a new topic that apparently seems to resonate well based on the research we did and is indeed attracting the right kind of people to our website.
So you're saying, hey, every time I write on this topic, I have a predictable outcome. That's when you start to get confidence internally. Yeah, I know that if I put out this 40-page pool on predictive lead scoring, I've got momentum. So I know that I'm going to knock it out of the park because I know what my outcomes are. That's when you truly can become confident. That's when you get the real budgets from the top of the business. And I love the way that you describe that. It's not about one page, one outcome only. It's about one page that can be communicated individually as well as a pool or as a cluster or as however you want to call it. But yeah, I love that is something that you all can see it with the data.
And I think one thing that I think resonates really strongly is when you say, like, at the end, it's all about the stories. And I think this resonates well in the sense of Amanda was asking about, like, how do we go beyond kind of number of MQLs? I think if I look at one of the things that where sales and marketing differ very much is like sales tends to think in stories and marketing tends today at least to think in numbers, right? We're talking about like MQLs, and it's like these high level numbers. And it's in part because you're higher up in the funnel, so the volume is bigger. Like sales is going to be talking about specific deals. Oh, we closed Cisco or we closed Nike, and everyone gets excited about that. And I think that's another part on the content side, one way to show value. And I really haven't seen many content teams do this well, is doing the same of saying, this deal that we just closed with Nike, it started with this piece of content, or
Yeah.
even like getting excitement from leadership and from the board and saying, oh, this content that we wrote, it actually got traction within Dell and like Cisco and whatever, and going more into a like story rather than aggregate numbers, saying, oh yeah, we wrote this piece of content. It generated 55% quality traffic.
Hmm.
Is that good?
Yep.
Bad? I have no idea. If I'm a board member, I have no idea if I should be happy, upset, intrigued. But if you tell me, oh yeah, like this piece of content, it generated interest from Cisco, Dell, and HP. Now, okay, please tell me more. And I think that's one
Right.
thing where content can show value there, and just like getting these stories